there's a Chinese saying that I once read, which has always appealed to me about culture or how we make sure that there's right leadership behavior. It says that when leaders speak, people look at their feet. It's not what they say, but which direction they're going to head after the speech is over. So it is what has been amazing is that the founding fathers have always done things in a certain way. They've been able to identify, nurture, and coach people who followed them to follow the same principle. And that running thread I find across the entire group of companies is amazingly strong.
Good to see you, everyone. Thank you for attending. Thanks for being here. Please tell your friends. We are switching gears for the next few webinars. Well, this webinar. Ram has lots of lovely, amazing friends, just like Ravi here on the screen today, who work in corporate and have to do with coaching or are coaches themselves. So in the next, I think 2-3 sessions in the Future of Coaching webinar, Ram is going to have wonderful guests like Ravi, and they're going to talk about coaching in their world. And we'll hear from some very interesting perspectives from some of the world's top companies. So I know you will enjoy today. I won't say if. So since you will enjoy today and you will learn something, please join us for all the other webinars, and please tell your colleagues to join us as well, because they are free and we are here at 9 p.m. India every single Wednesday. Okay, Ram.
Thanks, Magda. Yeah, sure. Yeah, welcome, Ravi. Thank you for joining us. And hopefully we have 2 other panelists joining us. Today's is somewhat special in the sense that we're going to talk about corporate culture or institutional culture, and within that specifically that of a company that I'm very familiar with, the Tata Group. And I invited 3 of my friends and those who have worked with me in the coaching space. Ravindra is one, he's from Tata Motors, and 2 others who hopefully would join us would be Venkat and Ramana, one from Tata Chemicals, another from Taj Hotel. So they are all CXOs in their respective companies in the Tata Group. So before I get into, and I'm hoping that they would join, they're both in India, so hopefully the time change doesn't confuse them in any way. I just want to lay down some basic definitions for what we are talking about. Culture has multiple meanings, multiple definitions, but the simplest definition that I'm going to go with is that it's collective behavior. And as far as it sort of applies to coaching, I would like to call it a systemic collective behavior, in the sense that in a systemic sense, it's about the institution or the organization or whatever the largest space of society that we all belong to. And then in the smaller groups that we form part of that larger society, be it in tribes, be it in divisions of companies, be it in communities such as families and so on, and finally the individuals. Hi, Ramana, PV, welcome. Thank you for joining us. So there's PV from, I'm not quite sure, PV, are you still with the Taj Group or you're retired? You are muted. We can't hear you still, for whatever reason. Okay, that's as soon as you're able to get connected, please do. Yeah, Thursday or now. So essentially, it has these 3 components of the larger collective, the smaller sections, and the individuals. So it's extremely systemic. And it's also systemic in the sense that the collective behavior influences the individual, and the individual behavior through the smaller parts, the larger collective as well. This is often forgotten. When we look at a larger culture, we tend to speak of, hey, this is how Indians behave, or the Americans behave, or the Italians behave, or the Japanese, or the Chinese, or whoever they are. And then you go down a little deeper, and then you have what might be called mini cultures. And then below that is a micro culture of the individual. And each one sort of builds upon the other, reinforces, empowers, disempowers, as the case may be. Okay, maybe I'll take a very quick break. So you are still with the Taj, or
yeah? Ram, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Hi, Ram. First of all, thanks for having me here on this call, and hi, Ravi. Ram, to answer your question, I have retired from Taj Group of Hotels, but I'm still continuing with them as a consultant. I'm the HR advisor and consultant for Taj.
Thanks, PV. Thanks for joining. Now, so just to continue where I left, there are several models which describe culture, and some of you may be familiar with these models. I very, very briefly go through them before we get into the nuts and bolts of what we are here to talk about, the specific of the culture in one particular entity, Tata's, and I'll explain the reasons why. One of the most famous and probably one of the seminal cultural models is that of Hofstede, or Hofstede, or however it is pronounced. It's 6 points, and then there is Fons Trompenaars, and then the Rosinski globe, and so on and so forth. In fact, I wrote a book for EMCC on this. And the Hofstede model, and most of them, almost all of them, they follow the Hofstede. And amongst the, let's say, the factors of what is part of the cultural model, one is about hierarchy. And this hierarchy could be what is usually called as a power distance, in terms of what power you wield, and the higher the power you are, and the person who's below you, what distance, and how does it make a difference in terms of the hierarchy. But it also it may not just be power, but the power which comes out of wealth, socioeconomic status. It could even be gender. Very often, the men exert unduly higher pressure, higher power than women in most cases, age, and so on and so forth. And within that, and from there, let's look at power as a space. And then there is a time aspect to culture, which is about these cultures. Some of them are long-term oriented, some cultures are short-term oriented, and so on and so forth. And you know, generally that in the Asian culture, we tend to look at things in the long term, whereas many of the Western cultures, they tend to look at it in short terms, like the corporate quarter behavior and so on. And a third factor could be in terms of the kind of risks that we take. Some cultures are known to be more risk averse, and some cultures are known to be more entrepreneurial. And one more, just to add, and there may be some more that's possible, is also about, some cultures are more about the individual, some cultures are more about the collective. Like many of the Asian cultures believe in the larger collective kind of space, rather individual. Of course, it goes through a whole spectrum. You cannot all totally be individually empowered. It would lead to anarchy. And then when it's collective as well, there could be within that collective, is there empowerment for everybody, or is it empowerment only for a few people? So it could result in democratic or dictatorial and those kind of societies as well. So these are multiple definitions. So before I close this, there's one particular, those of you who, if you have not seen it, I would really like you to watch this video. It's by a guy called Fons Trompenaars, F-O-N-S-T-R-O-M-P-E-N-A-A-R-S. It's a TED talk. Fons appeared in several of our, I think 2 or 3 of our colloquiums. In fact, I remember interviewing him once, somebody else, and it'll be there in the Kocharia list of videos as well. Fons is a globally acknowledged expert, and he's got his own very famous Trompenaars model, 7-point model. And in this particular video, he talks about a study that he conducted across the world. And the study, there are multiple versions of it. This particular study is about a situation that is described where you are a passenger in a car which is being driven by a very, very good friend of yours, a childhood friend, as it were. And that friend, there are multiple variations here, had had a few drinks and he's driving. He may be speeding 60 in a space where 30 is allowed in miles per hour, or he was speaking on the mobile where you're not supposed to speak on a mobile, and so on and so forth. And he presto, suddenly, unfortunately, he hits a pedestrian. And that's all the detail that is given. And he's taken to court, and the friend asks you, please come and testify on my behalf, saying that I was not drunk, I was not speeding, I was not doing da 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 da, and this is what I would like you to do. So the question was, there might be multiple variations, but simply the question was, would you say yes or would you say no? Would you speak the truth as you experienced it, or would you stand by your friend? The answer may many of us seem obvious, and is the most obvious mistake that we can commit. And you should really read Fons Trompenaars' report and his speech. Pretty much it was divided globally into 50% and 50%. Many communities, not just Asian, there were several Asian communities in it, and there were several Western communities in it, who said, truth be damned, he's my friend, I'll stick by him. And there were others who said, no, 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 truth is paramount. So I just want to go to this as a culture. So this is actually, strangely, ironically, this is not described in anybody's cultural model, including Trompenaars, that about the right and wrong. Do you consider the right and wrong as a moral obligation, ethical obligation, that the society teaches you this is how it should be and what is truth? And we all know that truth is no truth. It's your perception of what the truth is, often handed down by Moses or a bearded old man playing a harp, who created the man and then out of his rib the woman, and so on and so forth. Or by your ancestors or your caregivers. And that is all the truth that we believe in. If you really scratch and go into your inner self and start questioning the truth that you believe in, that is all it means. There is no truth. In the Vedic scriptures, it's very, very simple. It says there is one collective truth, formless, ununderstandable truth. There are multiple pathways to it. So we all devise our own happy, comfortable pathways to that truth, and then call that the truth. So here you have two truths. One is the morality of, do I stand by my friend? Substitute friend for your spouse, who you really love, not the one that you want to divorce, or your father or your child. What then happens? Would you make a change? Would you make a shift? So that is one factor of culture we very often forget. How does a culture, both collectively and then individually, decide on what is the right and wrong? And those who are able to get it more right than others in some ways, and we'll have to again go into what are those factors of what is the rightness. For instance, simply put, is your culture one of where success is about wealth, or is it about true happiness? That's a very important factor in deciding what your culture is. And the second attribute, which is very rarely addressed, which is very, very relevant in a corporate institutional context, is your culture oriented towards the performance or the people? This is a constant dilemma that most people face as executives. And we don't recognize it as a larger cultural dilemma. We sort of push it to the side. Oh, this is a corporate one. No, it's not. It's about the way that each of us behave. I'll stop here. So today, I invited these two gentlemen, not because for any other reason. I really do not know anyone, a woman from the Tata Group, and in future I would be very happy to invite any woman from Tata Group or younger people. And both of them here, Ravi and PV, are both CXOs. I had also invited Venkat, who perhaps has not been able to join. Because though I never worked for Tatas, most of my life I worked with Unilever, a large part of my life. It's sort of my alma mater. And one day, not in the distant future, I would certainly have some people featuring from Unilever, a culture I tremendously respect, and I was a part of it. But a company I was never part of, I never worked, but I had many friends, was the Tata Group, where I had the good fortune to do work later, where they have exemplified, in many senses, the two factors which are not part of the Hofstede model or the Globe model or the Rosinski model or the Trompenaars model in terms of culture, the rightness or the wrongness from a moral compass. How is it defined? Is it intuitive? Is it something which is collective? Is it always followed? Or what happens? To me, the way I see it, and I have seen it, and I'll just quote one incident and then pass it on to one of these two gentlemen, is exemplified. And this again, it's beautifully captured in a YouTube video of an interview by a professor in the Harvard University, possibly PV would be able to give you the reference later, with a person who was the general manager of the Taj Hotel in Mumbai, maybe a year or two after the terrorist attack, where the incident was pretty straightforward. A bunch of terrorists walked into the hotel and tried to hold it to ransom. And there were 200 people from the previous shift change who were there. And they were told, please go away. The hotel is under terrorist attack. And those who want to from the new shift can join, or they can also go. Not one person left. Not one person. And there were parallel incidents which are very well recorded of other hotels equally famous, where everybody ran away, leaving the guests to their mercy. They were not under full attack, there were threats of attack. And I happened to, in some ways, connected with it because there was, on that particular day, there was much after I left Levers, there was a dinner for the Unilever chairman, global chairman, the wives and managers, executives, senior executives, maybe 100 of them. They were caught and they were allowed, they were aided by these people at the risk of their lives to escape, climbing down the pipes and so on and so forth. And towards the end, when the terrorists tried to attack, a bunch of the hotel employees formed a human cordon. And if I remember right, about 20 of them died. Many other people died. Very few guests though, most of them all staff. And the general manager lost his entire family. And he was interviewed. And the Harvard professor asked him this question: how could you develop this culture in this organization? And his answer was very, very simple and in some senses painful. He said, we do not recruit people from the B schools. We do not recruit the Indian Institutes of Management and the IITs and so on. We go down to Tier 2 and 3 cities. And we look for people who believe in a simple axiom. In Sanskrit, it's called Atiti Devo Bhava. The guest is my God. We just check for that. The simple reason is this, that skills can be taught, but behavior is difficult to change. And that is what is the collective, that is the behavior. So very often this is referred to, even within the Tata Group and others, is referred to as a Tajness. And similarly, I see a Tata-ness. It may not have been that obvious, as in this case, so stark and so tragic, but in many ways, it articulates the culture of this fantastic company, which has been in existence for over about 200 odd years now, and still going strong. It's not the most profitable company in India. It's not the fastest growing company in India. But I've rarely known anyone who's working for this company leaving that company. They are, sorry to say this, they are underpaid. They could leave and they could get jobs at twice the salaries anytime they choose. And I know that from a fact or from multiple facts. So I'll stop here. I've taken enough time. So I would like to go to PV first because I referred to this Taj thing. Just PV, I just want you to tell us a little bit about, yes, I have talked about this, but over and above this, what is this Tajness? What is this Taj culture? How is it sustained? If you could just speak something on it, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ram. I think that, I have worked for Taj for 8 years and I'm still working, as I said earlier. And whenever I hear this story, what you narrated, Professor Deshpande's, the TED talk, every time I hear that or every time I watch that video, I would have goosebumps. And not only that, I feel like prostrating before the frontline employees of Taj. And this is the feeling I get every time I walk into our hotels. And I'll talk a little bit more about the terrorist attack and what was my conversation with some of these employees. I was not part of the organization. I joined the organization in 2014. And then the terrorist attack took place in 2008. We all know about it. So I was so curious to know, like you said, this is not the human nature. When there was a sort of a threat, unconsciously, we would either run away or do some the fight or flight and all that, we have studied in human psychology. That did not take place. So I was, in my conversations with those frontline employees at Taj Mahal Palace Mumbai Hotel, 2 or 3 things came out. In fact, I used to talk to them and ask them this simple question as to, what happened? This is unbelievable. Why not even one person ran out of the hotel? Or did someone express that kind of a desire to go out of it? And every time when I speak this language, there would be a sort of a surprise on the faces of these employees. One thing they consistently ask is that, sir, if something goes wrong at your home, would you run out of your home? It's the same thing for us. And it was so genuine. I'll explain it to you a little bit more. Some of the employees, they said things like, this place is our home. And some people said that, this is our temple. And everything in this hotel speaks to us. The pillars, the utensils, everything in this hotel, every time when we walk into this hotel, they speak to us. I thought that, what is this, all these things speaking to them? It's something like, it is much beyond the conscious level of these employees. Unconsciously, the kind of emotional connect they have with every part of this hotel is unbelievable. This is some kind of a psychic connection they have with the hotel. And another thing I have noticed is that very often we talk about work-life balance and all that. These people work there for 13, 14, 15 hours a day, many of these employees. And what happened is the boundaries between home and the workplace got erased in their minds, in their brains. There is nothing like a boundary that I'll have to finish my job and go home. This is my home. This is everything for me, kind of a thing. And another important thing was, many of those people, of course, on the following morning, they knew that Mr. Ratan Tata was standing at the Gateway of India. They saw it on the TV, and they felt that unconsciously that, this is the time we need to give it back to the company. What was the reason for that? Professor Deshpande elaborated on some of the HR practices, but I think that, it is much beyond that. The management, You spoke about Tata values. They lived these values generation after generation. What are those values? It is simple, the mutual respect. And at Taj, there is nothing like a rule book when it comes to some emergency of an employee. Let's take, for example, there is a medical exigency or something else for the family members. Nobody would look at the HR rule book and say that you are not entitled for it. It's a sort of a family. If there is a need, the company would take care of you, kind of a culture. That has been built by the top management, whether it is Mr. Ratan Tata or GRD or many other leaders who were there before. And this is where, unconsciously, this is my time to give it back to the company in the form of taking care of my customers. If I ran out of this hotel, what would happen to my client, my guests, my customers, was the question that unconsciously came to the minds of all those people. And you spoke about Karambir, the general manager who was there at the hotel. He handles Americas now. The entire America is handled by Karambir. And whenever we speak with him, last week, and in fact, I had a call with him. Whenever we speak with him, the kind of passion, the kind of loyalty, commitment, he exhibits about this company is unbelievable. We would never see this anywhere else in the world. And not only, I'll take another 1 minute to elaborate one more particular aspect. I knew that, many of the employees who were not part of the duty on that day, some people were at Taj Sats, hearing about this terrorist attack, they came to South Mumbai, to Colaba, and they got into the hotel, and then they saved some of the guests. Many people who came out, bringing the guests out through the back entries and other exits, again, they went back. And some people, unfortunately, they perished in that attack. Their family members, they all work for us, and their families were taken care of by the company. And they say that, things like, I have lost my husband on my wedding anniversary on that day, but God has given me a bigger family called Tatas. I could never, ever forget this family. I had never even once heard things like, oh, this had happened, and then all kinds of, nothing of any negative from their conversation. And this is not from one person or two people or the senior people. Everybody, whoever got impacted during that particular, it was something unbelievable. And how did this happen? Like I said earlier, it was the values of the organization, taking care. You talked about performance and taking care of people earlier. It is taking care of people would come first. If we take care of our people, they would take care of the company, was the motto. And if it is not the best of profit, so be it, but my people are more important for me. I can talk about this for the next, I think, 12 hours, but I'm stopping it here. There are any number of stories. It is not just one terrorist attack. Every day, the kind of mails we get from the guests from all over the country or even outside the country, they talk about our frontline employees. And the culture is at the bottom of pyramid when it comes to Taj, and nobody can really change it. It is so surprising that we can't really tamper with it, even if we want to do that. So I'm sorry I've taken so much of time, but I'm taking a pause, and then let's hear from Ravi also, and then I'll take some more questions.
Yes, thanks, Vivi. I just want to make a couple of remarks before I pass it on to Ravi. Yeah, very often many people say, and these are HR and management gurus, and they are completely wrong. They say, oh, Tata's is a philanthropic organization, it's a trust. It's got nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
The average person who is working in the Tata Group at various levels doesn't even know that. It's only these management gurus who know that and talk about crap like that. It's something which has taken years to build, 200 years maybe. It's exactly what PV said. There is no rule book that an HR manager or personal manager looks at. It is a seat of the pants decision. It's a decision of the heart, not of the head. That whatever decision is taken, it will favor the individual, not some entity called the organization. And on a personal note, it's more than me and my wife. I mean, it's got nothing to do with all this. We, for the last few years, have always decided we will never stay anywhere except the Taj. It's very simple. It's got nothing to do with, it's very selfish in many ways, to be honest. And we have stayed in the Four Seasons and the Ritz and whoever else, anywhere in the world. The simple reason is, like my wife always says, if, you drop something during a meal or something insignificant, there'll be three people who will be homing like pigeons to your table, says, pick it up or do whatever it is, replace it and say, sir, do you need anything? Or even if you were just looking around for something. I remember once in one of these hotels, we were there at a dinner, we were not even guests there, I mean, not resident guests. And I think my wife or another guest, they were feeling cold and something. Immediately, the girl brought in 2 shawls. Another time, one of them was looking for something to read, couldn't read the menu. So she brought reading glasses. I don't think this has not happened to us in any other hotel, believe you.
Yeah.
So we are, I mean, Tata is not paying me for it. I'm not plugging it for any of these things, a disclaimer, but this is what we have decided we will do. Yeah.
Ram, actually, whatever instances or whatever experiences you have quoted, that's Tajness.
Yeah.
Tajness, it's the way our frontline employees treat the customer.
Correct.
And like you rightly said, that's the differentiator for us.
Yeah.
When management gurus talk about strategy, a differentiator, this is the differentiator. Nobody else can copy it, actually. No other company can copy this and then replicate it in whatever time frame they have in their mind. That's our strength and that's our differentiator.
Yeah, and in fact, my wife can write a book on her experiences at the Taj, and it'll be fantastic. So anyway, I'll stop there. Now, Ravi comes from another part of the Tata Group, where there is no Tajness, but there is a Tata-ness of the Tata Motors, which is another amazing institution, which has been there for as long as I can remember. I was at one time a vendor into some of the companies that I operated, and I know the culture of that company. Amazing, totally amazing. So Ravi, tell us a little bit about how the Tata culture is exemplified in Tata Motors, please.
Thanks, Ram. Hey, good morning and good evening to all of you. My pleasure to join this conversation. Ram mentioned the fact that culture is not one monolithic, right? The Tata Group is 150 years old. So we have companies and businesses of varying vintage in the group. And of recent time, there have also been many acquisitions. So there's a variation across, right? But there is a fundamental principles or culture that is common in the organization, right? So I have been with the Tata Group only for 3 years, right? And I'm still discovering beyond my own company, which is Tata Motors. And I continue to get amazed by some of the things I experience within my own company and of course, across as I interact more with my colleagues in other Tata Group companies, right? So also we are a manufacturing company. Of course, all manufacturing companies are turning into services in a way today, but there is a variation between what Ramana told you and what I will probably share with you, right? See, what I find as one of the foundations of our culture is that from the beginning, what our founder always saw was the entire community as stakeholders. The definition was just not your customers, it is just not employees, definitely the government, the shareholders, but just the community that we exist in. Right? How does this translate? So my own experience, and as I listen to the history of the company and I see how the company operates today, right? When you talk about the interest of the community, which is always there, to an extent also very national, but we are a multinational company, and I can say that whichever countries our companies operate in, we follow the same principles there. So I'll just give you a couple of examples, right, on how this weaves through. We are in the automotive business, right? So we have been driven by some of the needs of the community, right? So for example, safety, right? A frugal, engineering, but one of the safest cars, some of the safest cars in India, right? Now, this completely translates because of putting your customer and your community in the center of what you want to do. This is perhaps has not been this has been an evolving industry, and this is not really the standard or expectation, but this is something that the company has pioneered, right? That's one example that I can share with you. The second thing that I would probably share with you is that I'll talk about communities where we work in, right? So for those of you in India, you know that a law was passed a few years ago, which stipulates that every company should do community service, or CSR as they call it, corporate social responsibility. The Tata Group of companies, much before such laws were passed, have always done something for the community. It can be Tata Steel, it can be Tata Motors, it can be Taj, it can be any company that you can pick and name, right? Even before the law mandated it, whichever community we have operations in, we've always adapted that community, right? It could be education, healthcare, water, environment. Much before these topics became current or laws required, people to do something about it. What is amazing about this is that, Ram mentioned the glue that holds people together. I think all of us probably would agree that compensation is just one aspect, right? This is an aspect of the belongingness to the community, their opportunity, the amount of volunteers we have across all organizations, right? It's just absolutely amazing when it comes to what happens to the community. And talking about employees as the next segment of it, right? So again, the roots go back to our founder and our initial leaders, wherein they introduced some of the most, far-sighted and far-reaching employee benefits, right? Provident fund or a social security in India was started much before the law was passed by the Tata organization, right? A creche before law mandated it was started. So if you want to think about, diversity, if you want to talk about equal opportunities, I think these were things that have been a part of the thinking of the organization, because conducting business was only seen as an aspect, more of an institution, is what I feel every time I look at it. So how does it even translate to modern day, right? When COVID struck, right? Even before the Prime Minister recommended to everyone, employers specifically, that please pay the wages, right, of your employees, even if your factory shut down. As a Tata Group, a decision had been taken that we would pay all employees, especially contractors and temporary employees, throughout the period. One. Second, a declaration was also made that payments to, small and medium industries who are our vendors would be prioritized. Nobody asked, or rather the government of course suggested that later, but these decisions were taken, even before any such suggestion was done. And throughout the period of the lockdown, it is just not payment of salaries, right? In some of our factories where we have a lot of youngsters working for us, these are workmen, they come away from their families, from surrounding, hinterland, and they live in towns. The meal that they get in the plant is one of the most full meals, or a wholesome meal that they get, right? So when the plant shut down, and also, restaurants were shut down, there was nothing that was open. Our kitchens were open and people could come and take their food. In some cases, we supplied food to the places where many of our people lived, right? Now, this, again, was not a central directive, or there was nobody who directing them, right? This is something that the local management team took a call on its own, right? We've always seen truck drivers as a part of our community, right? So any truck that had been stopped in the highway anywhere close to our plant was adapted, right? The truck drivers got medical help, they got food, right? Now, by the way, this is also done voluntarily by our employees, because you needed people to go out and do this when there is a lockdown and people's health is at risk, right? So our employees see this very much as a role on how can they support the community rather than just purely business, which is important for us to keep going. But this is what I've seen happening. And the last example I would give is, in terms of pioneering, right? So the first, let's say a 5-star hotel or a modern hotel was Taj in India. I think many of you know that, right? That pioneering spirit, if you talk to anybody in any of the Tata Group, they will give you example of how their company has pioneered something. So I can talk about electric vehicles, right? So again, when the government of India, about 5-6 years ago, in order to support the electric vehicle industry, went ahead and said, we will buy 10,000 electric cars, right? Tata Motors had no experience in electric vehicles. We had made 0 electrical vehicles till then, but we did an aggressive bid, won the bid, because there was a recognition that, we have to pioneer, not just for the sake of business, but also for the sake of the country. See, this is not, I'm here for 3 years, right? But what I can tell you is that this is a driving force in the organization because people see it, right? And there's a Chinese saying that I once read, which has always appealed to me about culture or how we make sure that there's right leadership behavior. It says that when leaders speak, people look at their feet. It's not what they say, but which direction they're going to head after the speech is over. So it is what has been amazing is that the founding fathers have always done things in a certain way. They've been able to identify, nurture, and coach people who followed them to follow the same principle. And that running thread I find across the entire group of companies is amazingly strong. It finds expression in different ways because from a company who makes salt, and today they are into many other consumer products, it could be tea or it could be a bunch of things, to a software company, a services company like TCS, to hospitality industry, to a car manufacturing company, right? The expression of this is different, but community always comes first. And the definition of community is very, very broad, right? Then national interest comes first, right? And an employee is at the center of all of it. So this I find extremely strong in the organization. But I must also, I would be, lying to you if I say that I'm not aspects of our culture that perhaps we need to refresh. And that attempt is constant. And interestingly, Ram, you also pointed that out. And sometimes these polarities exist, right? In an organization which is so familiar, right? Sometimes differentiation becomes difficult, right? And as organization, we also have to, while profit is not the sole purpose, and I don't believe it is the sole purpose. It is an important one for the sustenance of the organization, right? But that is also important, like I said. So performance is important. So how do you balance these two? Sometimes people may take advantage of this situation, right? So how do you ensure accountability? Third one I would say is that Tata Motors is 75 years old. Some of the companies are older, right? There are aspects of being hierarchical, right? With hierarchical, I believe bureaucracy and also a certain amount of pace is compromised. But our world is fast changing. So how do we make sure that we are able to, how can we make sure that we are able to continue to challenge hierarchy to become much more contemporary and to become much more nimble, because that is what the environment demands us of today. See, these go hand in hand. So when you have legacy, you of course have tremendous things that you can leverage, which stand as strength for you. But also there are some aspects of it, if you don't refresh, it does become a bit of a millstone, right? So these things do exist. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but when you just step back and look at, there are more pluses than minus. So I'm going to take a pause here, and back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ravi. Thank you very much indeed. Just for those people outside of India who may not know much about the Tata Group, pretty much everything is what they deal in, from steel to motors to now airways and hotels and software to consumer products. At one time, they used to run the electricity and transport services of the city of Mumbai. They ran it far better than what it's being done now, taken over by the government. That apart. And when Ravi talked about community, many people in India would know this, the township or the city of Jamshedpur. It's even now I'm honestly surprised many times, and suddenly I meet someone, that person says, oh, my grandfather was in Jamshedpur, or my father was in Jamshedpur, or whatever it is. It was a spawning ground for many people who came from the Tata Steel family, which made it its home, and an entire city was built out of that place as a community service, when most companies wouldn't give the time of the day for how their people lived. And this was a difference that Tata's made. Okay, coming back to you guys, about roughly 5 minutes each of you. Tell us a little bit about how this culture is being currently nurtured and sustained, be it through coaching, be it training, do other developmental activities. Both of you are HR honchos, and maybe other people can learn a few lessons. And I frankly think it's one of those companies where coaches should learn from. They are not the companies which need coaches to learn from, to be honest. And so that aspect of it, if you could address as to what is it that you're doing, what is it that people can learn from the Tata Group. Thank you. Ramana, PV, you first.
Yeah, sure. So specific to coaching, I'll just give an example. Ravi also spoke about performance versus people, and you also mentioned about it. It was, immediately after the terrorist attack, and because of the subprime, the crisis in US and all that, business in 2014 was in a very, very bad shape. The debt was piling up, and there was a need for accountability and performance. And by accountability, I do not mean to say that, it is throwing out people in the name of, the performance appraisals and all. It's all. One thing, which worked very well for us was that, first, when we realized that we need to put our focus on performance as well, and all the strengths which we have in the organization in the form of the customer centricity or the people centricity within the organization, how do we convert this into a performance culture? This is where, a few of those steps were taken. Of course, one was changing the organization structure. I'll not dwell much into that. The centralized structure was moved out into the geography. It was made into a geographical structure because we wanted to take the organization closer to the customer, number one. The second thing we did was we dispensed with the performance management system of every year giving those, the ratings. We used to have this rating like giving 3.5, 3.55, 3.6, 4, and all that on a 1 to 5 scale. And we used to get, I joined in the month of April in 2014, and my inbox would be full saying that, the front office lady was given 3.18, whereas I got only 3.10, and this is unreasonable. The first question we asked ourselves was, when we are speaking about a performance culture, which should be collective, when the guest walks in into any of our hotels, all the employees together would be providing the services. It's not one front office person separately and then the food and service person separately. This is where, like I said earlier, we have dispensed with that point rating system of giving individual ratings to our employees. We brought in a team appraisal system. Every hotel would get a rating at the end of the year basis the scorecard, and whether it is the bellboy or the general manager, they would get the same percentage of bonus. This was put in place in 2015, and it became a global case study by Deloitte. They wrote a case on this one. And the other one, this is specific to your question, Ram, about coaching. We put a general manager development program. We wanted to, because a general manager is a sort of a CEO of a hotel, a general manager development program, a 9-month long journey. It was with IIM Ahmedabad and Nanyang University in Singapore. We partnered. And this 9-month long journey, it was more of coaching. It was, we converted, it was, Ravi spoke about, the hierarchical culture. In a hotel industry, it is a hierarchical culture, but, it is not in a sense that, it is so much of bureaucracy. This is where we wanted to make every general manager a sort of a coach, so that one is that, respecting people in the hotel, whether it is a dishwasher or a manager, respecting and treating them as human being, which was already there, which was a strength for Taj at any point in time, strengthening that one. And second is coaching them on the behaviors, because in a hospitality company, behaviors are much more important than the skills. I'm not saying that skills are not needed, but it is the behavior. You gave the example of your wife who could write a book. I'm sure that she is going to write a book on the behavior she had experienced from the frontline employees and not about the skills. This is where, a specific coaching program through this 9-month long journey was put in place by us. And, we coached these general managers to become coaches. And, we have seen the way the culture has, at some point in time, ours was a sort of a mandate, give a mandate so that, it had creeped into the company from the top management. This is the reason why I said that, the culture exists at the bottom of the pyramid when it comes to Taj. Any number of leaders at the senior management team at my level could try to tamper in by talking about various things, but, it still remains the same. This is where, developing the general managers as coaches so that they will become, we coach them on the conversations, what kind of conversations they could have with people in the company. I'll just give one example. As part of the performance management system, we have a quarterly, we call it Q chat. Q chat is quarterly chat. The way, it happens is that, there are only 3 questions that the manager would ask. One is that what went well in the previous quarter. Second is what could have been better. The third is what's your plan for the next quarter. These are the 3 questions. If you look at it, these are the 3 coaching questions. And if there is a feedback with the permission of the employee, the manager we released several videos around it. We trained up people on this. And then, slowly, It has now, everybody talks about these quarterly chats, Q chats. It has become a sort of a culture within the organization. Another one, and then I'll hand it over to Ravi. Another one was that, we used to have the annual engagement surveys. One of the companies used to do that Gallup, and then the focus group discussion. This is all the stereotypical way, every organization does it. And given the special culture we have within the company, what we had introduced was that what we call as We Connect. It is an everyday survey. Everybody, whether it is a contractual employee or the general manager, they all, machines were put at the gate at the time office. People would give their how is your mood, and they'll write a comment, a qualitative comment. The qualitative comment could be as simple as the sambar in the cafeteria was bad yesterday. And all this would go up onto the notice board every day. And every day the general manager would have a conversation with all the employees saying that, what's the action that is being taken. So it's a sort of, the bottoms up. This is when you look at it from the coaching perspective, listening to the employees and understanding as to what exactly is happening. It could be their issues, it could be work related. So basis all these things, at this point in time, several cross-functional teams, during the pandemic, human is becoming a very big business for Taj. And some of the youngest people in the organization, they head these businesses now. And some of these things, ideas came up from the employees. So I'll take a pause because I know I'm taking too much of time. I'll take a pause and hand it over back to you, Ram, and then to Ravi.
Yeah, and Pete, don't worry about the time. Ravi, don't worry about the time.
Okay. Right.
I've already told the audience, those of them who want to stay on, because I have one more question, final question, which is going to be very relevant to the coaches in terms of you both are qualified coaches, and therefore, what is your advice to them and how? So before that, Ravi, so about the practices that you follow in Tata Motors or other divisions that you know.
Yeah, I mentioned to you that there are aspects of our culture that we certainly want to strengthen and amplify, and there are aspects of our culture that we want to change. We recruit a large number of youngsters every year, right? And we, of course, recruit to replace attrition. And then finally, as we grow into newer areas, right? So for example, electric vehicle. The kind of talent we require is completely different. So we hire a lot from outside. So the first and foremost thing is, how do we imbibe our culture or help them, also to appreciate some of the culture, and at the same time, be open to some of the new ideas or change that they can bring in. When we are hiring these people to come and help us and bring new ideas, there's no point in stifling them. So our focus to strengthen our culture, again, strengthen, I would say, to make it contemporary, continue what is good, but also adapt new things. The people leaders play a very significant role in this. So there's been a tremendous amount of focus on people leaders in our organization to help them with this, right? So making sure that one, we are open to new ideas from outside. Second, there are some clear essential that we will not give up. We will not compromise them. So this is one thing that has begun to give us some results as we hire more and more people from outside. The second thing that I would say is that in a small way, what we have started is we started group coaching, right? So one of the things I mentioned earlier was about accountability, right? So accountability comes across in a group. There's a lot more need for open conversations within the leadership team, wherein they not only hold themselves, but they hold each other accountable. This kind of intervention is only, in my experience, possible when you have group coaching, because there has to be a level of comfort, a level of trust that is possible in the leadership team. And when the leadership team exhibits this kind of behavior, the rest of the organization will follow. So those are two examples, Ram, that I would like to share on how we've tried to leverage coaching in different ways, both at individual level and at a group level, to strengthen our culture.
Thanks, Ravi. If you could just continue and offer whatever, as a coach yourself, what is it that you would advise the coaches around, not just merely about just working with Tatas or whatever it is, what you see embodying those principles of the larger framework of the culture, the Tataness and the Tajness and so on. And after you, PVU, if you could close that with that. Thank you.
So, see, I'm a human resource professional. So one of the things that we work with is with the team for team effectiveness, right? So there is a culture of every team, right? Because the way it expresses itself, while you have a common underlying culture, depending on the history of that particular organization, the culture is a little different. So the first thing that I would say is that when I'm coaching teams, right, and I found value in this is, don't take it as they all have the same vision of a shared culture, right? I think it's important for us to co-create culture, right? So that would be the most critical step when we are working with the team. This team should have a common sense of what kind of culture do they want to build for themselves. So the more time you invest in this, I think the next few steps will probably become much more easier. That has been my experience. The second thing that I would probably also say is that we need role models, right? So, and whenever you talk about culture and change, I think it's a change that people want to, leverage coaching the most. So how do we help people actually call out the change they want to make and use each other? There is that amount of what I would say psychological safety that they should feel in the team, that people actually say, hey, these are the 2 or 3 things that I want to do, and how does the rest of the group help them? Now, this could be either when we are doing group coaching or even when we are doing individual coaching. Unless they get help from the system around them, they are unable to change, right? So these are my 2 things that as I begin to coach more, when I finished my training with Ram a few months ago, but as I implement more and more of these are the 2 things that I am discovering as can be biggest barriers, but also most impactful if you leverage it well.
Thanks, Ravi. PV?
Yes. My advice to coaches on this call, Ram, is that, when we speak about culture in an organization, it's always an imperative to focus on the top management behaviors. It's, I would say that, coach the top management, the top people, the CEO, and the top 25 people in the organization. Many times, the culture we experience in the organization is a reflection of the attitude of the top management. Taj example for what I said, the behavior of the people at the front line is a reflection of the attitude of the top management. So this is where many times, people, the top management may not necessarily be a narcissist or psychopaths, but at the same time, as we grow, I'm also a human resource professional and worked as the CXO in 3 companies. I think that as we grow, I think that something gets into our head. Power corrupts is what, and we do not know that. Many times we don't really understand as to what kind of behaviors are we exhibiting as we gain more and more power. So this is where the coaches should focus on the top management is one thing I would highly advocate, and that's where the whole thing lies. The crux of it lies in the top management. Change the behaviors through coaching. That's one thing I would recommend. The second thing I would recommend is that, there is strength at various levels in the organization. While I say that, you need to focus on the top management behaviors, there is strength at various levels. And we need to remember that, when it comes to coaching, we often speak about executive coaching, life coaching, and differentiate all these coachings from each other. Every person is a human being, whether it is the CXO or the dishwasher. And without a human being coming into the workforce, we all know that, I don't have to talk about it. Fundamentally, a human being with all the emotions and feelings is the one who is coming to the. So please do not differentiate in the name of, I'm a performance coach, I'm coaching on his or her performance, I'm an executive coach. Life coaching, at some stage, my experience is that at some stage it moves seamlessly into the life coaching. Every coaching, results into a life coaching is what I have experienced. This is where, even the life coaches need to focus on the corporates. Corporates could make a big difference to the society. It could make a big difference to the society. So coaches internally and externally could play a big role in changing or transforming the organization culture and making sure that the organization lives the values for the sake of its employees and then all other stakeholders, which includes the community, like Tatas have been doing it for the last several centuries. These are the two advices I would give, Ram.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, really, Bibi. And combining what both of you have said, actually, our experience in the recent past, and it's taken a while for us. Magda and I have been receiving quite a few inquiries, and we have started doing, earlier today I was talking to Ravi, assignments which are group work, and very often it is systemic in the sense it's aligned with the larger goals of the organization. Co-creating that for the individuals and the team, it has to align with that. And primarily, these are about culture in some way or another. Each organization, of course, defines its culture in different ways. They have their own leadership competencies, core principles, and so on and so forth. And everyone is aspiring to be more human, more integrating the values of work and life at workplace, the fulfillment of the people who are working for. It's really fantastic. I mean, that's really likely to change the scene. Probably, I mean, it might take a decade or so, but more and more, if that happens, it's going to be extremely powerful. And before I let you go, in the audience as well, I would deeply be grateful if any of you can suggest companies where perhaps you are working or you're doing work with, who you think have cultures that are truly worth replicating in other places, following as exemplars. And if you could help us also to connect with them, please get in touch with me or Magda, and we would be tremendously grateful to you. But to both of you, thank you very much. Ravi,
thank you, Ram.
It's been an absolutely wonderful session, and I'm sorry to let you go, but much as I love Tata, as much I love you guys, I think every session has to come to a close. And thank you very much indeed, and hope to see you in another program in the future. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Thank you for all of you staying for a few minutes more. Bye.
Thank you, Ram, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ravi. Bye-bye.